At some point, quietly, without ever announcing it to yourself, you made a deal with your own life. You told yourself that this stretch of exhaustion, this season of financial pressure, or professional uncertainty, or relational strain, was temporary. That once you got through it, things would finally settle. You would finally arrive somewhere calmer. And the part of this you've never let yourself fully look at is how many years you've now spent waiting for a version of ease that keeps moving further away every time you get close to it. This isn't a story about bad luck or about you somehow failing to build the life that would finally feel light. It's a story about a belief so deeply embedded in how you think about your own future that you've likely never even examined it as a belief at all. You simply treated it as fact. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why that belief was never true. Why your mind keeps manufacturing it anyway. And what actually happens the moment you stop waiting for it. Picture the last time you told yourself, almost automatically, once this is over, it'll be easier. Maybe it was a deadline, a difficult relationship, a financial stretch, a stage of parenting, a season of grief. Try to remember how certain that thought felt in the moment. How obvious it seemed that relief was simply on the other side of endurance. Now think honestly about what actually happened once you got there. For most people, the answer is quietly unsettling. The specific difficulty passed, and almost immediately, something else took its place. Not because life is cruel or rigged against you, but because of something happening inside your own mind that almost no one is ever taught to notice. This is where psychology becomes uncomfortable, because the belief that life gets easier isn't simply optimistic. It's structurally false in a way that has very little to do with your circumstances, and everything to do with how the human mind processes change. Behavioral scientists have a name for the mechanism responsible for this hedonic adaptation, and it may be one of the most quietly powerful forces shaping human dissatisfaction. Hedonic adaptation describes the mind's relentless tendency to recalibrate to any new baseline, whether that baseline is an improvement or a decline. A raise that once felt life-changing becomes the new normal within months. A relationship that once felt like relief from loneliness eventually starts to reveal its own frictions. The mind isn't malfunctioning when this happens. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do, treating your current circumstances as the new 0 point, and immediately scanning for the next problem that needs solving. This means the ease you're waiting for was never actually a fixed destination waiting patiently for you to arrive. It was a moving target, one your own nervous system quietly relocates the instant you get within reach of it. Because a mind calibrated entirely around comfort would have been a significant evolutionary liability. Comfort, for most of human history, meant lowered vigilance, and lowered vigilance meant vulnerability. Your brain was never designed to let you simply rest in satisfaction. It was designed to keep noticing what's missing. Because noticing what's missing kept your ancestors alive. Most people believe the solution to this is simply achieving more. Removing more problems until eventually the accumulation of solved difficulties adds up to a life that finally feels light. But that isn't the real problem, and chasing that solution is precisely what keeps so many capable, accomplished people locked in an exhausting cycle of arrival that never actually arrives. Something even more dangerous is happening beneath hedonic adaptation, and it lives in a distortion of memory that quietly reshapes how you interpret your entire past. Cognitive psychologists call it rosy retrospection, the tendency to remember past periods of your life as easier and more manageable than they actually were while you were living through them. Ask anyone whether their 20s were simpler than their 40s, and most will say yes, without hesitation. But interview that same person during their 20s in real time, and you'll typically find a person navigating an entirely different, equally consuming set of anxieties about money, identity, direction, belonging. The ease was never actually there. It's manufactured retroactively by a mind that finds it easier to believe difficulty is a phase you're currently in rather than a constant feature of being alive. This creates a devastating loop. Your mind tells you the past was easier than it was, which makes the present feel uniquely burdensome by comparison, which convinces you the future must eventually offer the relief the past supposedly had, which sets you up once again to be quietly disappointed when that future arrives and simply becomes another present moment with its own set of difficulties. This isn't a personal failure of perspective. It's a structural feature of memory itself. And almost no one is ever taught to see it operating in real time. This is the part most people never notice, because it doesn't feel like a cognitive bias while it's happening. It feels like a completely reasonable belief that better days are coming. And that belief is often the exact thing standing between a person and genuinely engaging with the life they're actually living right now. But even this isn't the deepest layer of what's happening here. Something even more dangerous is unfolding beneath the memory distortion. And it involves a fundamental miscalculation about what difficulty is actually for. Alfred Adler's psychology offers a crucial reframe here, one that challenges the entire premise of waiting for ease. Adler believed that psychological growth is inseparable from the deliberate confrontation of difficulty, that a life organized entirely around the avoidance of struggle isn't a thriving life. It's a stagnant one. For Adler, the tasks of life, work, relationships, contribution to something beyond yourself were never meant to become easy in the sense of effortless. They were meant to become manageable through the development of what he called social interest and personal competence, capacities built specifically through friction, not the removal of it. This means the entire premise of waiting for life to get easier may be aimed at exactly the wrong outcome. The goal was never a life with less resistance. It was a self capable of meeting more of it. This reframes something that most people spend their whole lives misunderstanding about their own difficulty. The struggle you're currently enduring isn't necessarily an obstacle standing between you and the life you're supposed to be living. In many cases, it's the exact mechanism building the capacity that life will continue to require from you indefinitely. Because difficulty in this framework was never a temporary intruder. It was always meant to be a permanent feature of a life being actively lived, not avoided. The next realization changes everything about how this pattern actually functions, because it reveals what's really being avoided every time someone waits for ease. Instead of building capacity, neuroscience research on stress and adaptation offers a striking parallel here. The nervous system, much like a muscle, requires a certain amount of manageable stress in order to develop resilience. Psychologists call this the concept of eustress, distinguishable from harmful chronic distress, a form of challenge that, when survived and metabolized, actually strengthens a person's capacity to handle future difficulty. A person who spends their life waiting for stress to disappear entirely, rather than building their tolerance for navigating it, isn't protecting themselves. They're quietly weakening the very system that would otherwise allow them to move through hardship with something closer to steadiness. This is why people who have faced and processed real difficulty often report feeling more capable, not less, while those who have spent decades avoiding discomfort frequently find even ordinary stress disproportionately overwhelming. This is where evolutionary psychology adds an uncomfortable but clarifying layer to the entire pattern. The human nervous system did not evolve in an environment where prolonged comfort was ever the norm. It evolved through scarcity, unpredictability, and constant low-grade challenge. And it is, at a fundamental level, built to function within exactly those conditions. A life engineered to eliminate all friction isn't actually the environment your biology is optimized for. It's closer to a kind of unfamiliar territory, one that can leave people feeling strangely restless or dissatisfied, even when, by every external measure, their circumstances have genuinely improved. This doesn't mean suffering should be pursued for its own sake. It means the absence of all difficulty was never actually the psychological destination your mind was built to recognize as home. This is where Viktor Frankl's work becomes not just relevant, but foundational to understanding what's actually being missed in the pursuit of ease. Frankl, writing from the most extreme conditions a human being can survive, arrived at a conclusion that reframes the entire question this documentary opened with. He observed that people who oriented their lives around the pursuit of comfort or the avoidance of suffering were often more psychologically fragile than those who oriented their lives around meaning, even amid ongoing hardship. Meaning, for Frankl, wasn't the reward waiting on the other side of difficulty. It was often forged directly within it. This suggests something almost inverted from what most people assume. The waiting itself, the belief that life must first become easier before it can become meaningful, may be exactly backward. Meaning has never actually required the absence of struggle. It has often required the presence of it, met with purpose instead of avoidance. The Stoics arrived at a strikingly similar understanding. Centuries before modern psychology gave it a name. Seneca wrote extensively about the danger of postponing genuine engagement with life until circumstances improved. Observing that people often live as though a more real version of their life is waiting somewhere further along, while the version they're currently living gets treated as a mere placeholder. Epictetus offered the discipline that makes this bearable in practice. The recognition that circumstances themselves were never actually the primary variable determining a person's peace. Judgment was Marcus Aurelius ruling through plague, war, and constant political instability. Never once had the luxury of waiting for easier conditions before engaging fully with his responsibilities. And his private writings reveal a man who understood that the obstacle in front of him wasn't a delay from his real life. It was his real life arriving exactly as it was always going to. Carl Jung's model of individuation completes this picture in a way that finally answers the question underneath all of this. Jung believed that psychological wholeness was never achieved through the removal of difficulty, but through the integration of it, confronting the parts of experience that are uncomfortable, uncertain, or painful, and incorporating them into a fuller, more complete sense of self. A life spent waiting for ease is, in Jung's framework, a life spent avoiding the very confrontations that individuation requires. This means the waiting isn't just a delay of comfort. It's a delay of becoming, a postponement of the fuller, more integrated self that can only actually take shape through direct engagement with exactly the difficulty currently being avoided. This reframes everything this documentary opened with. The ease you've been waiting for was never a real destination sitting somewhere ahead of you, patiently preparing itself for your arrival. It was a story your mind built to make the discomfort of the present feel temporary. A story reinforced by a memory system that quietly rewrites the past as easier than it actually was. And an evolutionary design that was never calibrated for permanent comfort in the first place. None of this means your exhaustion isn't real, or that hardship should simply be welcomed without complaint. It means the framework you've been using, that life is supposed to eventually stop asking anything difficult of you, was never actually accurate to begin with. And living inside a false framework will always produce disappointment. No matter how much progress you actually make, none of this means nothing will ever change, or that relief is impossible. It means relief was never going to come from the disappearance of all difficulty. It comes from a different relationship with difficulty altogether. One where struggle stops being interpreted as evidence that something has gone wrong with your life, and starts being understood as evidence that you are, in fact, still fully living it. So the next time you catch yourself thinking that things will finally be easier once this particular difficulty passes. Pause long enough to ask yourself a harder question than what you're waiting to be over. Ask yourself what capacity you might be building right now inside this very difficulty that no easier version of your life could have ever taught you. If this kind of psychology, the kind that finally reframes what you've spent years waiting for, is what you come here for, subscribe, because there's more of this waiting for you.